Thank you, Elizabeth, and good morning, everybody. It's a beautiful day here in Dallas. Yesterday, I started off by talking about the context of this field of public interest design. I talked a little bit about the last 10 years and where things have been, talked about the Latrobe research, sort of a snapshot of the AIA membership at this moment. This morning, I'd like to talk about where I think we can move together from here. What could this future be like? And particularly in the context of why I feel you all are here, and that is, how can public interest design be a meaningful part of your career? So obviously, what the future looks like is going to help shape that. And I'm going to talk about SEED, which is a step-by-step process. It's a lot of different things, but for the sake of our learning objectives, I'm going to use it as a step-by-step process based on best practices that we've found, and we'll go through that together. But before I talk about how to follow a step-by-step process, I want to talk about why. And that definitely ties into the subject of what the future looks like. So let me ask these questions. These are sort of the questions for this morning. How do we move forward? What is needed to grow public interest design to have a greater impact in communities? And I mentioned yesterday that, the case studies we collect, that I've been collecting since 2000 when we had our first conference, and trying to share the wisdom of each and also share lessons learned. Sometimes sharing the mistakes is as valuable as the successes. These have generally been individual, wonderfully entrepreneurial efforts. And as I said yesterday, I hope this always continues. I hope we never say, this is as good as we need to be, let's just stop here. There's just too many challenges out there for us. In fact, if you've ever heard somebody say, all the design ideas have been done before, we're just repeating them, run away from that person immediately, because I don't believe that's true for a second. I think we've just barely cracked the solutions that need to happen. And there's so much more to do, which is exciting and challenging, and as you saw in the idea of the 98%, a lot of wonderful opportunities for us. So yes, we need to continue the individual activism, but we also need to be collective, work together, and try and create systemic change. And the reason I think systemic change is so important, I'm an art history major, okay? And you look at sort of cycles of human movements and progress, and some stick and some don't. And what really makes something stick is, first of all, that it has a basis in cultural meaning, right? So there's a lot of architectural styles that come and go, and they're just consumed, and they sort of fill a magazine for a couple of months. They never resonate with something deep and cultural and a need we have in society. So I think that's the first thing. And that's obviously part of public interest design. It's right in the name, right? There is a relevance to what we're doing. But even so, we need to be systemic for this to stick and for it to grow. So one of the ways to be systemic is to really look at this as a profession, and to grow it as a profession, and to communicate it with the public as a profession. And again, I think the working definition that I use, and I was really glad when Darren, who's not a designer, brought it up to represent their project. That was really meaningful to me, that somebody non-design saw the value of this mission statement. That's really what we're hoping. Every person should be able to live in a socially, economically, and environmentally healthy community. And he's obviously living that with health by the vegetables, and economically by the jobs created. So this is where we start to communicate what we're talking about, first of all among ourselves, but more importantly with the public. Oops. So to give another context of what a profession is like at the beginning, or what a field is like at the beginning, I'm going to look at two other professions sort of at this moment in their development. The first is journalism. And journalism is interesting because you don't have to be licensed to be a journalist, but there are very definite ethics of journalism, right? So let me show you this sample here, Exhibit A. So this is a book called You Have Seen Their Faces, and it's by Erskine Caldwell and Margaret Burke-White. And this was written in 1937, which was at a period of photojournalism. Sorry, I'm not supposed to go over that side. I'll stay over here. Margaret Burke-White, you know, some of the amazing sort of social realism photographs in American history were taken at this time. Very powerful artistic movement. So Erskine Caldwell's a writer, and Margaret Burke-White's a famous photographer, took a lot of photographs for Life magazine, Gandhi. She took the iconic photo of Gandhi for Life, the cover of Life. So they put this book together, and the way it's laid out is their photographs with a quote below. So this one on the screen, for example, it says, Peterson, Alabama. Quote, I suppose there's plenty to eat somewhere if you can find it. I suppose there is plenty to eat somewhere if you can find it. The cat always does. Okay? And then here's another one. Sweet Fern, Arkansas, quote, people get passed by, unquote. So it's pretty, you know, it's pretty emotionally, I mean, this one, Fairhope, Louisiana. Folks here wouldn't give a dime a dozen for white tenants. They can get twice as much work out of the blacks. But they need to be trained. Beat a dog and he'll obey you. They say it's the same way with the blacks, unquote. All right, so this is, you know, very emotional stuff when you're reading it. Well, how would your feeling change if I told you that these quotes were made up? That these people never said these things? I mean, would you feel that that was somewhat of an ethical violation of journalism? They're in quotes. These are in quotes. Right. I mean, the public has an expectation of what journalism represents. And what's interesting is, and it doesn't even say this, you read the whole book, and finally in the back here somewhere, it tells you that. So I read an interview with Erskine Caldwell, and they said, why did you do this? And he said, well, I don't believe there's a difference between fact and fiction. Okay, so that's Erskine Caldwell's personal ethic, right? Well, what would the value of journalism be to us if we had to understand the personal ethic of every single journalist, right? That would be, you couldn't read a newspaper because every time you read an article, you had to understand what the ethic was. Is this fictional, or is this fact, or what is this personal ethic of this journalist? That the profession wouldn't stand. It would not have the same public value it has now. Does that make sense? Now, what's interesting is, again, you don't have to be licensed to be a journalist. And what happens when somebody violates a journalism ethic? They can't take the license away, right? What do they do? What's that? Well, yeah, they might get fired. But the magazine, you know, the newspaper will do a retraction, right? Because it's sort of self-policing their profession. They say, sorry, that was incorrect. We want to set the record straight. So it's a really interesting phenomenon in journalism that, yeah, and so they'll probably get fired, probably never hired again. And this happens occasionally, even on a show like This American Life, which sort of like, you know, is fictional. Everybody kind of knows he's sort of making stuff up, but they even retracted something from that radio show that they felt was misrepresentative. So they have to do that. Otherwise, the public value of journalism would fall, right? So let's talk about public health, which, and this is also from the same period. This is a photograph from the Tuskegee syphilis study, which was started in 1932 when the U.S. Department of Public Health went to Tuskegee, Alabama, and started studying the syphilis in poor rural African-American sharecroppers, 600 of them. And they never told the volunteers for the study that they had syphilis. The volunteers thought they were getting free medical care, which they did, but in 1947, it was discovered that penicillin cured syphilis, but nobody treated these 600 men, and it went until 1972. Their syphilis, and many died during that time, but their syphilis progressed, and it's a horrible disease, and it was only when somebody blew a whistle and alerted the press that this was happening that they canceled this study. So this is the U.S. Department of Public Health, and it's unimaginable that this could have happened for, almost 30 years after the discovery of a cure. I mean, why do you even need to study it anymore if there's a cure? I mean, I can only imagine that these doctors thought they were doing something in the public interest. It's hard to get to that conclusion, but that must be what they thought. In fact, the last supervisor of the study, there were about 5 different supervisors. There wasn't just one supervisor. And many doctors involved, but the final supervisor even went to his death not admitting that he had done anything ethically wrong. So now in public health, we have protocols that prevent anything like this happening again. And there are 3 elements of the protocol that I'd like to bring up. One is informed consent. So first of all, you would need to tell people not just that they have this disease in this case, but also what the study's about and any possible harm that could happen. The second aspect is transparency. In other words, there's full disclosure about what's going on with the patients. And the third is accountability, right? So somebody's holding these doctors accountable, making sure they did what they said they were going to do. So those are 3 elements that, even in public health, were not part of the profession in 1972, frankly. I mean, so this is a really recent sort of professional standard for public health, which is critically important, right? And in fact, those standards, Tuskegee is one of the reasons those professional standards were developed. So if we hope to have a profession that is trusted by the public and serves the interest of the public, we really need to learn from these other professions that have a public value, and we need to make sure we don't make the same kind of mistakes. So what would this look like in architecture? So this is sort of I think it's a humorous example, or silly, I guess. So back in 2009, MoMA announced that they were doing a show called Foreclosed. And if you remember 2009, the biggest issue in the country was foreclosure. And I was very excited because I believe that every issue is a design issue, and I was like, this is fantastic. We're going to show that foreclosure is a design issue, and this is just going to be amazing. Well, the show opened, and it was pretty clear immediately that A, there were no actual people involved in this, and B, that really it was just something developed at Columbia University and had nothing to do with foreclosure. And in fact, when they were criticized pretty quickly that it had nothing to really do with foreclosure, they said, well, we're not bankers, we're designers. What do we know about foreclosure? Well, if you learn anything here in 2 days, I would hope you realize, kind of the exercise we did yesterday with Greta, if you're going to address foreclosure as a designer, who do you want to talk with? Bankers, probably the first conversation you might want to have. Who's a stakeholder in foreclosures? Bankers, right? You don't go and make this up in a office in Columbia University. So, but here's what they did. they divided the country up into 5 parts and gave it to 5 different design teams. So this project is for Orange, New Jersey, which is somehow this is representing 1/5 of the country. Whoops. I just want to point out here that the section for Texas, this is, so one design team is coming up with one design solution that's supposed to be for all of this area. So I don't know what you think you have in common with Minnesota, but they seem to think that one design would do it. So here's the one for Orange, New Jersey. Now let's just take a moment to appreciate the formal beauty, and I think it is beautiful, and I kind of think that's the point. Nope, nothing wrong with beauty, but oops. What a banker probably would have told you, and our entrepreneurs here can confirm this, that if you have a real estate market where houses are worth less than their mortgage, what you don't want to do is flood the market with more housing. Okay, that seems to be pushing prices in the wrong direction. So basically what they did was fill these streets up with an existing neighborhood, fill these with new houses here. So, you know, real estate 101, bad idea. Then you start to think, well, what do people living in the neighborhood think about their new neighbors right outside their window? Yeah, you know, might have been a good idea to ask them. I'm not going to guess. If I were there, I wouldn't particularly like that new view. But they went to, CNN went to the mayor of Orange and asked him about the show, and it could have been a moment, this could have been a Paul Farmer moment where the mayor of Orange, New Jersey said, oh man, design is awesome, now I'm a believer, it's going to help us with foreclosure. But no, that's not what he said. He said, I didn't hear anything about this show, I didn't know anything about it. But now that I'm looking at it, I can tell you that we're not ready to give up our streets. So, you know, obviously the mayor would be a stakeholder that they might have wanted to talk to, but they didn't. So what's the ramifications of this? Well, I mean, I think it's a lost opportunity. I really believe that if they had done this well, this could have been a blockbuster for MoMA. You know, you could have people from all over the country saying, we got to go see this show because we have a foreclosure crisis. Let's go see what designers can contribute here. They obviously didn't do that, and it wasn't a blockbuster, and most people didn't see it. And so no harm done, you might say, but on the other hand, you might say it does reinforce a reputation that I think we have of kind of playing our own games and not really being interested in what design can do for other people. Okay, so that's what design looks like when it's not really involving the public. Or 2009. You didn't see it? You didn't hear about it? Well, actually, in contrast, the Cooper Hewitt show designed for the 90%, that catalog has sold more copies than all of their other catalogs put together, right? So that's why I suggest this really could have been a big show. You know, if it's relevant to the public, guess what? The public's going to come see it. You know, it's like pretty simple logic there. So let's look at another example, and this one gets a little more dangerous. Nobody actually got hurt, but you know, I think we need to be careful with what we're doing here. So so after the tsunami in Japan, I was listening to NPR, and Cameron Sinclair, the founder of Architecture for Humanity, was on the radio, and he said, I went to the Open Architecture Network and I put in tsunami disaster solution, and five projects popped up. Now, if you don't know, Open Architecture Network's a site where people can go and post their projects and say what they're doing and who they will help, and there's no vetting. It's just post your own stuff. So I thought, well, that's interesting. So I went to the Open Architecture Network and I put in tsunami disaster solution, and this was one of the projects that popped up. So let's take a look at this project. So what the text says is, 20 people are supposed to climb into this watertight box and shut the top, and then you wait for the wave to kind of hit you. And then you tell me what happens. I mean, there's no foundation here, right? So I suppose they thought you would gently sort of float and then kind of float back and then you climb out. Well, you know, I mean, this thing might roll, this thing might be smashed into some buildings, this thing might be carried out to the Pacific Ocean, like a lot of other stuff that's still floating around in the Pacific Ocean after the tsunami in Japan. You kind of wonder, well, how long can they stay in there? Where's the air supply? Is there any water in there? And you look at the sidebar where it says, how many people will this serve? And the designer modestly said this would serve 200,000 people. So I'm just we're very fortunate that nobody actually tried this, and hopefully people would realize this is not a good idea. But to have somebody who's respected in the field on the radio saying, you know, there's solutions available is cutting it a little close, right? And there's no protection in place that might have stopped something bad happening. So that's where we want to make sure we avoid any kind of Tuskegee moment in this field, because we're making great progress now, and that would certainly set us back, and we'd have a lot of trust we don't have much trust as it is, but that would put us in a sort of deficit, and we'd have to rebuild from that point. So these are some of the reasons I think we need to talk about a profession collectively. This is a open conversation. People are putting out ideas, including me and lots of other people. But I think it's an important conversation to have, and I think we need to really take it seriously and carefully. Okay? So now let's imagine you're a mayor of Kansas City, and somebody comes into you, let's say an architect comes into your office and says, hey, I've got a great project for you. This project is going to provide green, affordable housing. It's also going to reduce crime in this neighborhood. It's also going to provide jobs. It's also going to improve health. It's also going to preserve a cultural landmark. So you're the mayor of Kansas City. How do you know if this is a great project or if this is an architect sort of blowing smoke, right? Even if the mayor happens to be an architect, which would be wonderful, how can they tell? This is a real problem, because this is a real project. It does all those things. It's an amazing project. It did get city support, thankfully. But on the other hand, it's tough for the public to know. It's tough for the neighborhood to know if this is going to be real or if this is some design game that's not going to include them. So it goes back to the informed consent, transparency, and accountability. So this project came into the SEED Award program, which is something I hope you all will be a part of, and I would love it if we have winners in this audience, and I would encourage you to apply. It's really a great way for us to share your great work. But this came in, and I looked at all those issues they claimed they were going to address. And what do you think I thought? I mean, let's say I was the mayor and I saw this project. I mean, I thought it was ridiculous. I mean, there's no way. There's no way that a project can do all that stuff. But then, looking at the SEED Award, I say, who are the stakeholders? Oh, well, there's the local hospital as a stakeholder. There is the city police. There is the community college. There is the city. And there is a foundation with nice deep pockets, Make It Right Foundation. And there is the neighborhood association. So I'm like, wow, okay. They have the stakeholders that really should be. They have the experts involved that really should be involved in this project. Then I look at the floor plan. There's the police substation. There's the 50 units of affordable housing. There's the job training room. There's the health, it's not a health clinic, but a health consultation room. It's all in the floor plan. So we gave this project a seed award even before they had their financing. And I'm really proud of that, because I believe that if these projects start out right, like that, like they did, with the right stakeholders involved, these projects have a strong chance of succeeding. So now this project is built, and well, so it's not just you claim to do these issues, but there's something called performance measurements, which is how is the design functioning to accomplish those issues, right? So performance measures are something that, unfortunately, designers don't know anything about, and it's one of the things we need to learn about to be good in this field. So here's how they are addressing those issues. Preserve historic school through renovation and restoration, therefore restoring historic fabric. Provide health initiatives, cooking classes, health services, outdoor spaces, and a fitness center. I won't read all of them, but I will tell you now that the building is built, the local hospital has come in and done a health assessment of the neighborhood, identified the 3 greatest health risks, and they're doing training to address those. The president of the Homeowners Association proudly told me that crime had gone down 26.1% since construction had started. And how does she know that? Because the police tell her. They have a partner. And the crime hasn't gone down because of more police, actually. The crime has gone down mainly because of they have, more eyes on the street. And you take what was a sort of magnet for crime, this big empty school, and you put a lot of activity in it, and that just generates eyes on the street by having people there, including the 50 units of affordable housing. So here's the original school building, which is some housing, but also has the community spaces in it. And then here's some new additional. And one thing that the city did that made this work was make this a green enterprise zone, which helped with the financing. So all of these partners pitched into the pot to make this happen, right? And then again, going back to one of our learning objectives, how do you leverage partners' assets to make a project happen? You can't address health unless you have health experts involved, right? So that's how they leveraged partners to make a truly amazing project. So this is a good example, right? And one of the things, maybe the main thing we look for in the seed application is, were the public involved in these decisions? Were people that are going to be impacted by this project consulted and listened to? Not just did you have a meeting and they show up, show us in the design how their input was a factor. So this is what, this is a Wordle, and basically this represents what was said during the participation process. And it's a nice graphic to show to the community. What's interesting about it, you see housing right here? It's not very big, right? Well, housing is actually housing funding is what paid for this project. So housing, the affordable tax credit, and the green enterprise zone made this project fundable. So that's another stakeholder. They're happy, they got their 50 units of housing, but if it had just been a housing project, the community would have said, what? Yeah, okay, sure, housing's okay, but it's not really one of the things we care about. So this project listened and implemented the other things that the community really cared about. So that's why this was really an exemplary project. And in the documentation, we want to know, who was at the meetings? Where were the meetings held? Do you have a list of the attendees? This is the type of documentation we want in the seed application process. Going back to transparency, informed consent, and accountability, right? And this is actually a designer who used to work for this architect. Now he's at Make It Right. So if you remember yesterday, we talked about hybrids, people who have 2 skill sets. So this is one of the reasons this project works so well, is you have somebody who understands both the foundation involved and the design side involved. So these are the types of projects that are just, I really think this is going beyond, it's just going to a new level that's really wonderful. All right, so let's talk about seed and what seed has to do with this. So hopefully I just laid out the reason why we need something. Now let's talk about what that might look like. So SEED stands for Social, Economic, Environmental Design. That term was coined in 2005 by a young woman who said, we need something like LEED that includes social and economic. So we were all pretty frustrated impressed and happy that LEED was having such a good impact on the environment, but frustrated that social and economic issues and social and economic equity were not part of that conversation. And frankly, I don't think it's very fair to go to a community and say, let's design something, but I only care about your environmental issues. I don't want to hear about your social and economic issues. And I want you to put up a lot of your resources to address the environment, but we're not going to really do anything for your social or economic challenges. So that's not really the kind of conversation I think we should be having with communities. I think every community has a unique mix of challenges, and the first conversation should be about what they are, not I'm here to address mine. So that's how we started. And now we describe it as a common standard to guide, evaluate, and certify the social, economic, and environmental impact of design projects. So hopefully based on the conversation we just had, or the speech I just gave, I guess, that's why this has resulted, to try and help understand what this profession and what this field looks like and what the public can expect from us. So it's also a language. A lot of this is about communication. So what language do we use? I was at dinner with a couple last night who are not designers, and I used the term public interest design, and it was the same conversation I've had a lot of places, including with my parents. Like, what are you trying to do? Well, it's called public interest design, and that's been a term that's been really valuable for me because I didn't really have a name for myself for 23 years. I was the non-architect or the alternative career person, Now I have something I can call myself and people understand it. So language is very important. It's also a network. It's free to join. I hope all of you will join. It's just a way of sharing. We send out sort of the best ideas we find as a newsletter, and it's a way to get in touch and hear about things that are happening, like our conferences or the awards program. So hope you all will join. It's also a way of, we get feedback. We have 2,600 members. So it's a way of, in fact, the SEED principles and mission were identified and developed through a survey monkey of the SEED network. So we use the network to help make decisions, that it shouldn't just be a few people making it, really should be a collective decision. So that's one of the reasons, one of the values of the network. So if you go to seednetwork.org, it's easy to join. I'd ask you to consider that. So let's talk about some of the benefits of the SEED process. It is a process. It provides a step-by-step guide for designers and communities to assess challenges, define priorities, set goals, and create design projects to address critical social and economic issues. And a critical question, or critical point to know is the SEED application should start as early as possible in the project. I think it ideally starts when that first conversation happens, like who's there, because if you can't do a good job, you can't go back in the process and fix things. So really this is meant to guide you and suggest ideas to you about what you might be doing at this point in the process. And you can't go back and have a meeting with a banker after the show opens at MoMA, right? So if that had been an application to SEED from the beginning, we would have immediately responded that the stakeholders who should be at the table are not at the table. So that's why it's a good idea to start early with the seed project. And I'm going to talk about, it's an iterative process. It really is a dialogue between the reviewers and you, or the team that's applying. Oops. Participation functions as an online communication platform that can include multiple stakeholders and diverse community members in the process. Broad and diverse participation in a project is a requirement of the seed evaluator for a project to be determined as in the public's interest. So, first of all, it's a way that people can log on and see what's happening on the project. We're working on a mobile app so that people who don't have access to the internet, many more people have smartphones now, so we're working on that. But the trajectory is more and more people will have access to the internet, and that would be critical for it to be available to all, information available to all. But also, we use it in the application process to make sure that the public is involved, that the stakeholders and the community is part of the process. Transparency. Progress towards success can be tracked online and in real time. The results of the project are made public, visible in achieving these goals or not. So this is the accountability. Did you meet the goals or not? And also transparency. So not everybody can go to a meeting at City Hall at 2 o'clock, but you can log on and see what happens to the project, right? So it gives access to that information. Accountability. The seed evaluator tool provides a proof of concept that goals were viable and appropriate for the community served, and at the end of a project provides a certification that goals were met. So there is a certification if goals were met and if the right stakeholders were involved in the process. You don't have to go for certification. It has these other values without certification. One recent value is that you get LEED credits. So this is a nice evolution because of the original reason. Now LEED gives you points for going through part 1 and 2 of SEED in the LEED process. So actually, it shows that the environmental folks have actually started to talk about social and economic equity, which is wonderful. You don't get many points, but you at least get some points. So that was a big sign of progress in my mind. So I'm not going to read all these, but basically it's a guided approach, understandable and manageable steps. So what I want to stress here is that the seed process is not actually like a separate evaluation process you have to do. It is my design process. It is the process I go through to design something. So, you meet with the community residents. That's not an extra step. That's something I do in my design process. So I want to be clear that this sort of documents the process throughout the design and construction and afterwards, okay? So the certification only happens after a period of use to make sure things happen, right? So there's post-occupancy, so it's not, you don't get certified when the construction's done. We don't actually know at that point if it's gonna do what you wanted it to do. Does it actually reduce crime or not? We don't know yet. And each indicator takes a different amount of time. So you may be able to certify a project 1 month. Let's say you're doing a daycare and you wanted to provide 50 new spots for children. Well, on day 1 that opens, you know you have 50 new spots. So you can actually apply for certification on day 2. Some things, if you're creating jobs, that may take 4 years to show evidence that you've actually created a job. So when you can certify projects varies, depending on what you're trying to do through the project, but it certainly doesn't happen at the end of construction. So these are reasons why you might evaluate, but my point here is it's not an additional scope of work. It's really the process. Now the other thing I want to say is, and this is the big one of my favorite things to get to say, the seed process is also identical to writing a grant. So some of you may say, I wish I knew how to write a grant. Well, I'm training you right now how to write a grant, okay? The SEED evaluator is actually based on something called the Kellogg Logic Model, which is pretty much the standard for the the grant makers industry now, and federal agencies use it, like Vista uses the Kellogg Logic Model. And they just ask the same questions that we ask. Who's involved? What are the issues? Who verified that those were the issues? How is the community involved in the process? What is the result? How are you going to measure result? So these are the questions we ask in SEED, and these are the questions that funders want to know also. So the nice thing is you go through this process, you have an excellent, believe me, I've written grants for a long time. The SEED answers give you the best grant application I can imagine. So that's one other reason to evaluate, because that's what funders are looking for. Oops. Hello? Elizabeth, I need, batteries died or something. Great. All right, who uses it? So really, we've worked hard on the language, so there's no design language. In fact, the logic model is horrible. It's got so much jargon in it that it still confuses me. So we've tried to take out all the jargon we can, make it as simple as possible so that anybody, not just a designer or a grant writing expert, can fill this out. And we don't use, I think it was SEED 2.0, we said, is this a landscape project? Is this an architecture project? Is this an interior project? We don't do, and then you would be directed to an application that used your language. Well, we decided that was a bad idea because the public doesn't use that language. So now we eliminated that, and there's just one application that really doesn't have design jargon in it either. And so it's interdisciplinary, but also we feel is pretty clear for anybody. We also have a Spanish version online. Oops. So here's what we're about to come out with SEED 4.0 with brand new graphics and a little revised logo, so we're very excited about that, but it will be the same content, so everything I'm saying will still work. But here's the home page. There's where you can sign on and become a member, SEED Network, or SEED Evaluators, where you start the process. Some simple descriptions. I'm really happy to say that I get almost no phone calls of people not understanding what, so I think we've accomplished some good clarity at this point. People don't seem to have questions. There's also downloadable instructions. So here's basically what the process looks like, and probably on this size screen you're not going to be able to read this, but it's an iterative process, and we believe that all public interest design is actually an iterative process. You have an idea, you have it verified, and then you iterate, right? You respond to that. And so that's what our process is too. These are some of the basics. What are who is the community? How are you defining the community? What are the issues and how have you come to understand those as issues for the community? Just a little bit about design right here, not expecting you to have formed the design yet. Talk about participation and then talk about performance, which means what are you hoping to do? How are you going to address affordable housing? What income level are you serving? So that's all part of the first phase. Then you submit for review and we give you feedback. So if there's something missing, we'll send it back with comments about that, like maybe you should talk to a banker, maybe you should talk to a nurse, maybe you need a more representative section of the community. Or it gets moved on to part 2. So once part 1 is approved and moves on to part 2, it's basically an iteration, just a development of the same things from part 1. Have you confirmed the issues? Have you prioritized the issues with the community? Now, what is the design? How is the design responding to that information? How are these issues in the design response? And then what participation have you had? And again, what are the performance measures? So it's really the same, just a more second iteration. Usually the design is pretty much complete at this point. So this is still pre-construction at that point of approval. Then construction happens, and then part 3 is after completion and or use. Yes?
Is your project too small?
No. No project's too small. My favorite project that I did was a chicken coop for $500, and it was to provide, it was to address hunger for farm workers. And you know what we did? We measured the amount of eggs produced, and boom, it was. So don't think you have to do a social, economic, and environmental. In fact, if you look at the book, the way we've laid out the issues in back, red is social. So this project, we have 3 social. This project has 2 economic and 1 environmental issue. So, and we actually don't have any in here that only address 1 issue. I kind of wish we did. Kind of messed up the graphics, I guess, but actually we're trying to show. So there are 90 different issues in here, and that's sort of what we're trying to show. You know, here's an index. These are based on an index by issue. Not by, is it landscape or is it architecture? It's by issue. So if you want to know about life skills education, you know, you're a community member, you can look that up in here and see what this project did to address life skills education. So great question.
What kind of turnaround time in the evaluation process? So you submit for first review. If you're on a fast track on your project, what kind of turnaround time do you expect to get from first review responses?
Okay. Everything is turned around in 6 weeks. We can do it a lot faster if needed. Usually it's about 3 weeks, but we guarantee it in 6 weeks. But we can do it in a week if it's needed. Yes?
The first application,
yes.
Does that happen before, basically as a plan of action on how you intend to engage the community, who your stakeholders are going to be, or do you do it after you've actually gone through? Because sometimes you need to talk to people to identify the issue.
No, this is people you've already talked to. Because we actually asked you to provide information, who they are, and we have the right to contact them.
Right.
So this is people you should.
Done the community
Yes.
part of it.
Yes. Well, no, you don't have to go through the whole process. We just say who are the stakeholders involved and what are the roles they're going to play. So they should have already been identified as partners, but you haven't gone through the whole participation process necessarily when you do part 1. Part 1 is really sort of the concept.
You're just mapping it out.
Yes, right.
To clarify on that.
Yeah.
So then what you're saying in the first review, you can identify the people you're planning on working with, but not necessarily partnered up with yet?
No, they should have committed to being involved at that point.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Is there any differentiation in evaluation based on like a more formative evaluation versus summative evaluation? And is their evaluation continuously throughout the whole process, or is this something that happens maybe?
Well, so here's one thing that's interesting is our first certifications were projects that were actually already occupied, but they had documented the process. If you remember the Durham Performing Arts Center, that actually was completed when they applied, but because they had monthly meetings at City Hall with minutes, the whole thing was beautifully documented, including the woman who told them, you should hire some of our at-risk youth. I mean, that was all clearly laid out. So, but that's not an ideal situation because most people don't keep those records. Now, ideally, now tell me if I'm answering your question. Ideally, we're looking for numbers to quantify results. So that's part of the performance measures we ask for, is like, how are you going to measure results? If you remember those scorecards, like I said, that Butaro Hospital provided 1,000 jobs, right? We don't want to just say, oh, we're helping people, We actually look for numbers, and, it's the wonderful thing about your degree that we all don't know very well is what is a performance measurement, and how do you measure reduction in crime, you know? And they
Yeah,
keep-
yeah, I think that is that it's just more
Okay.
based and process based.
Yeah.
So, but this is kind
Well,
of-
it's definitely process.
But yeah, but this is kind of like your evaluation in itself for process, and then the measures you're talking about are like outcome oriented.
Yes.
So there's some cool. Thank you.
I'm looking for some good questions from you, which I hope I can answer. Tell everybody what your degree is again.
I'm getting a master's in public health and a master's in applied anthropology.
Applied anthropology. Okay, here's the thing. So here's the start of the application. In terms of use, just saying that we have that you have the right to use the images, and that we have the right to actually contact the stakeholders that you provide. That's our verification process. So this is part one, just sort of give you an idea of what it looks like. You're identifying who the primary contacts are. So there are two types of participants with this. They're the people who can actually input the information, and that can be as many people as you want. Are the people that can come and see. This isn't actually available to the public at this point, because a lot of projects really need privacy during this. You know, sometimes my students want to blog, and I'm like, you know, that's really the stakeholders might not want their conversations shared with everybody. So this is shared with whoever the project team decides to share it with, can come in and view this. But it's not public until it's completed, and if we use it as a case study with your permission. Does that make sense? But this is where you get the feedback, right? So you'd get, there's nothing in this one, but so here's where you identify okay, so please list design team members, identify all other significant contributors to the project, including stakeholders, organizations, agencies, academic participants, and other collaborators. Okay? Include name, email, and mailing address. So this is where you would list who is included in the past tense already. And that can change, right? Hopefully you get more and more stakeholders as the project goes. And then here's our feedback. So who is the community? What is the demographic qualities? List the historic and cultural characteristics of the community, geographic identity. So here's when I say all issues are a design issue, here's our growing list. And this is this is for me, what I'm most proud of is every time we get a new project, it may bring a new issue in. And so we can add to the list. So like I said, we've got 90 in the book. You know, this is really, and really, again, I'm going to say this. I think the public will care about design when we show that it addresses the critical issues in their life. So this is the sort of front door for the public, right? We have a disaster problem in our community. What's the immediate responses? Well, let's look up other examples of how design has addressed immediate recovery from disasters, right? And this is not the Open Architecture Network. These are vetted, right, and certified. That's the difference. So how are you addressing the issues with design? Here's where you describe how design is playing a role. We have three types of feedback. One is SEED threshold. In other words, are you doing something that violates the SEED principles of transparency, accountability, and informed consent? Right? That's where it gets sent back. But we also have suggestions. So if people are using this for sort of mentorship, we send back suggestions, and we also have comments, which is like, awesome, great job. So we have three types of responses in our feedback.
Does your jury pool rotate, or do you have the same people?
So right now we have two people doing this. Heather Farrell, who is architect and cultural anthropologist, and then I edit her. We started out with a nice big team of volunteers, and mainly due to the timing issue, we couldn't guarantee how long it would take, and also we were concerned with consistency. So right now this is working really well, and we can turn things around really quickly. So again, check for community challenges, addressing issues with design. What is the design response? What are your research methods? What are your participation methods? What are your measurement methods? One thing we're working on, we don't have like a really rich, what we'd like to have is a resource of suggested engagement tools. I mean, there are many great books. Greta mentioned Henry Sanoff yesterday. We'd like to have it accessible here, but right now you have to sort of go to other resources if you want ideas about good engagement tools.
Bryan, do you have a definition of design?
Do I have a definition of design?
Yeah, I mean, if this is a process that you are going to involve community in, marketers, design solutions.
Yes.
But I'm not positive that's the same thing as this definition of design. So is there sort of an operating definition of what design means for SEED?
That's a great question, Eric. We are issues focused. So design is the tool to address the issues. We don't actually believe that there has to be a design product. So it can be a system, it can be a policy. We would love to get Architects and Designers for Social Responsibility had a petition initiative, which was to boycott prison construction. We really wanted them to apply. We thought that would be a really interesting example of accomplishing an issue, a national issue about incarceration, and the tool was a petition. So I would just have to say it's an open definition, which is kind of a cop-out, but we haven't wanted to, one of the reasons I like using design instead of architecture is because the public has no idea what an architect is. And you're right, design has the same problems, and they may think design is just adding a little bling to your life or whatever, but I think we really just try and focus on the issue, and whatever the tool is that gets you there, if it, we're looking for some type of design, but it's very, I think one of my favorite quotes is from Sergio Palaroni, who said 90% of the impact of his projects has nothing to do with the actual physical object, right? So it has to do with equity, it can have to do with empowerment, it can have to do with pride. So that's a wonderful statement, but if we just focus on the design objects, we kind of miss that. Just think for a second what that means. Any actual project you do, you can multiply that by 9 times, or he can, he's good at this. You can multiply the value of that 9 times beyond just what the physical entity is. Talk about value, talk about, bang for your buck. It's really amazing. So it's a great question, but I haven't really defined it. So then the last step is including the design. Besides what I just said, we asked for your design documentation. But again, that could be a petition or a policy. So you can see up here where it's moving along so here's the project application, here's part 2, and here's part 3, which is post-occupancy. So I'm gonna, ta-da, you're certified. Okay, see wasn't that simple? I'm not, yes?
Sorry, I've been trying to find a good time to ask this question, but,
Now's a good time.
okay. I feel like there's a lot of similarities between public interest design and how other people are defining service design. And I know that's an emerging field in the U.S., but do you see a correlation, or have you seen projects that are
I have. I mean, I think, you know, it's sort of a Venn diagram. I'm not aware that there's an accountability aspect. Do you know? Are you aware of accountability in sort of this sort of process in service design?
Well, I took a studio in service design, but it was an interior design studio.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a physical aspect to it, and we did involve stakeholders, and the end result was to find some sort of metric. But that
Fantastic.
was, one
Yeah.
studio.
No, I like the term public interest design. I certainly am not trying to say there's no other meaningful terms or processes. I mean, I never had this process. I mean, this is what I have to go by, myself. Are you at UNT or UTA?
Yes, but this was a studio in Melbourne.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I feel like they were trying to create a hybrid, so it wasn't purely service design.
Well, that's really interesting, and part of this process is to try and collect good examples. I mean, we certainly wouldn't disqualify them because they call it service design, but I don't really know. I mean, I would still want to look at it through the same lens of who were the stakeholders? Was that the mayor? I'm just saying we would want to look at who. Yes.
Just to jump onto that shortly, I went to the big design conference last weekend in service design, there's a lot thing there. In service design, the difference between public interest design and service design is like you still go through some of the process of engaging stakeholders and like looking at a user using a product or a design from like beginning to end, and it's kind of holistic in that way, but there's no set of values that you're like, there's no moral underpinning. So like the net system is a service design concept because from inception of the product to delivery, but there's no like we're trying to solve a social problem necessarily. Like it can be used for that, but not explicitly. So I see the difference in public design as that.
Thank you. All right, well, my time is up, and thank you. I mean, hopefully we've answered questions throughout. We don't have time for questions right now. We will have time for questions at the end of the day, so thank you. Don't forget to